The Old Kent Riverbank Run had its first run in 1978, about the time of the first running boom, and it's about the time that the Michigan Runner began publication. And we have here the first two editors of the Michigan Runner magazine. We're going to be talking about the Old Kent Riverbank Run, which became the third Riverbank Run in recent years. On my right is Mike Duff.
Hello, Jenny.
On my left is Dave Foley.
Good to be here.
One of the first things we're going to talk about is running the 15-mile run. It's actually 15.5 miles.
15.5. Don't forget that half mile. That was uphill, by the way. Right. 0.5.
Right. Or a 25K run, as it has been ever since its beginning. Mike, you've run it a few times. What do you remember about running?
I think the most memorable part of the run was along the riverbank. I mean, that is the name of the run, and so the presence of the river and the quietness and the serenity, let's say, of that out and back loop that took you, that 15.5 miles. Really, that's my most memorable piece. Although I think coming back to the city and seeing the crowds also contributed to making it one of my special races. Although I didn't race very much, I just plodded along. I made it, but I enjoyed it an awful lot. Yeah.
Well, Dave, I know you've run it a few times, but you were also part of a family that was affiliated with Old Kent Bank. Is that right?
Yes, my dad was the vice president at the time the race started. That's how I first found out about that first race in 1978. My dad said, I was living in Cadillac, and he said, we've got a race going down here, and I know you run races. Want to try it? Sure.
Did you run that first one?
Yes, I did.
There were a lot of people on that first one, weren't there?
It was about 1,200, and it was special for me because they brought Bill Rogers to town. He has always been kind of my hero, and to have him right there and get a chance to meet him was special.
Well, now, he won that first one, I understand.
Yeah, he had been, of course, he's from Massachusetts, and he had been training with a very young Greg Meyer in the Greater Boston Track Club. And Greg had told Bill that, why don't you come back to my hometown and run this race? And Bill did, and Greg finished quite a bit back in second that year.
I believe the Grand Rapids Track Club, as it was known at the time, was very instrumental, along with Marty Allen, the vice president of Old Kent Bank, in getting the race off the ground. But Dave, one of the things I'm always curious about is the 25K distance. What do you know about that?
Well, I know when they were looking at having an event, I believe the old Grand Rapids Track Club used to have weekend runs, just fun runs, and they would follow what would be roughly the course. Well, they looked at the distance, and it was too long for a half marathon. It was way short of a marathon. So someone at some point probably said, what about 25K? And it was a popular distance because you can run 25K and not be chewed up the way a marathon chews you up. It's a very good distance for somebody who's thinking about a marathon in their future to begin to get the feel of running some distance. And it seemed to fit well by going up the river, down, across the bridge and back again.
Well, that is a great course, and I certainly do appreciate seeing those tall buildings off in the distance on the way back. So, Dave, what are some of the things you remember about the course?
Well, I remember, I guess, I had just started running, and it was one of my first big races, and all the crowds and all the hoopla. This was kind of new. This was very exciting. Being a Grand Rapids native, even though I'd gone off to Cadillac to become a teacher, it was fun to come home. And it always felt like home because I was going through areas that we had driven around and I had grown up with as a kid.
Well, one of the things that's special about running is you get to be in events with the big names, with Bill Rogers, with Joni Benoit Samuelson, with, at the time, it was our own Greg Meyer. Greg himself became, a 7-time winner of that race? And he himself is from Michigan, and he came back all those years. What are some of the other things you can remember about the elite athletes, Dave? I know you've kept track of some of them.
Well, Michigan Runner really helped because we would do a feature off and on one. And so I had a chance to go up and spend an afternoon with Bill Rogers and do interviews with Joni Benoit Samuelson and our own Doug Curtis. We forget that Doug was an important figure internationally as well.
And didn't somebody named Mark Smith actually win it one year?
Yes, Mark Smith. When I started as a high school coach, Mark was a freshman. He won 3 state titles in cross country in his 4 years. Then after running at Eastern, he asked me to coach him again, and so I coached Mark, and he had a very successful race. He won it and set what was then the U.S. record for the 25K.
Speaking of U.S. records, in 1995, USA Track and Field decided to bring in the 25K distance as a national championship, and the Riverbank Run, now the Fifth Third Riverbank Run, has held that championship ever since. That was not the beginning of the international runners coming to Grand Rapids. Do you remember some of those early international runners? Brian Sheriff comes to mind.
Yeah, I remember seeing names that you had seen in the international races, in the Olympics, and then showing up here. And for one thing, initially it really kind of taught us a lesson, because these guys would take off, and it would be three guys from across the Atlantic Ocean leading our race. The first few years we kind of passed the title around U.S. athletes, but I think it's really good for people in Grand Rapids to see world-class athletes. And now I see that the U.S. runners are back up in that lead pack again. So I think it's been a great experience. We reached out beyond just Michigan and the Midwest.
I think in the beginning, too, they had a Midwest region, Michigan kind of culture to it. But as you pointed out, Dave, with this international flow coming, it expanded in much more detail and presence, I think, in the country, too. So,
in fact, the kid who won it in 2006, Fernando Cabada, people were saying, "Who's that?" And not only was he an American who won the race, but he set a new course record. One of the other introductions was the addition of wheelchair racers. And I think it's the only 25K wheelchair race in the world. Anybody remember some of those wheelers?
I remember watching them, first seeing them at Boston about 1979, and then seeing them come here. I always was just amazed, because to me, running it was hard enough, but to run it just using your arms, and there are hills on that course, and watching these guys charge up those hills, I have always been awestruck by their abilities and their talents at this area.
And some of the big names among the wheelers are Gene Driscoll, who is known for having won the Boston Marathon 7 or 8 times. I forget the number now. And Krieg Chaborg, I believe, still has the course record. And Saul Mendoza from Mexico was one of my favorites. The 5K, have either of you ever run the 5K?
Yeah, I ran the 5K, and it's really a special race in my memory, because that was the race where my daughter beat me as a runner for the first time. So we ran the 5K, and before we warmed up, she wanted to see the end of the course, and so I showed her where it was. And when we were running together near the end, the last half mile, I looked up and I said, "Remember when where we are now? This is where we warmed up." Boom, she was gone. So that was it.
That was it. I did run the 5K in the later years when I couldn't knock off the 15.5-mile race anymore. And what I remember most about that is it kept you in the city area, and that also had a nice flavor to it. I had a chance to see Grand Rapids in a different from a different perspective, and I think that lended itself to a big city run. I always enjoyed running marathons in big cities, and where Grand Rapids isn't considered like Detroit or Chicago or New York, but you still had that neighborhood flavor of running through the city and seeing the different parts. So I remember that about the 5K.
One of the things that I was struck by was the original trophy that they gave out to the winners was called the Calder Trophy.
Calder.
Yeah.
Oh. Ending the race at the Calder was quite impressive, I thought. Yeah.
Well, Mike Duff and Dave Foley, thank you very much for talking with us about 30 years of the Fifth Third Riverbank Run in Grand Rapids as Michigan Runner gets ready to celebrate its 30th too. Scott Sullivan is the editor of the Michigan Runner magazine, and I'm Jennie McCafferty, a former editor of the Michigan Runner magazine. Scott, we're going to talk about some of the more recent developments in the Riverbank Run. It's really become a national event. And you have run the race yourself several times. What are some of your favorite things about running the race?
Well, it sort of traces a story in its own right. It's an odyssey. It starts downtown, right in the main plaza of Grand Rapids. You run out of the buildings, along the river, out into the countryside. You run flat, flat, flat. You cross some bridges. You go through some parks. You come back into town through an old section. Finally, you come back into the urban sprawl. In the process, you're running 25 kilometers, which is a real test of your insides.
I think that's one of the things that makes it an exciting event. It's a distance that people don't practice very much because it's such a rare distance. In fact, one of the things I remember about it was when the high school kids from Rockford were really hot. They kind of turned things around during the Riverbank Run, and the parents were running the race, and the kids were out along the side of the course cheering the parents on. I ran it the year that they had to change it because of road construction. Do you remember that one?
Yes, I believe that may have been 2001. It started at Old Kent Park, the home of the West Michigan Whitecaps, and it was an eventful race.
Let's talk a little bit about a couple of champions. Many times the people who run the race and win it are not U.S. citizens. In fact, because it's a national championship race and because it has such great prize money, runners, the best ones from all over the world, come and run the race. But we have had a couple of American champions recently. Let's talk about Dan Brown. Remember him?
Well, Dan Brown, a great runner. He's, I think, now with the Nike project out in Oregon, an Olympian in 2004 in both the 10,000 meters and the marathon. Dan broke a streak of Kenyan wins of about, 6 or 7 years. I think Keith Brantley won one year. Dan is a great champion, and he ran a hard-nosed race and surprised about everyone but himself, but gave a lot of us a great thrill in doing so. I do remember the one year that they ran on the non-traditional course, we had a chance to see the winners coming back. The course looped on itself, and I had a chance to see, I believe, Joseph Kariuki, the Kenyan winner that year, and it was really breathtaking for me to see these guys, to be in the same race with guys who ran on this level, and to actually see them running on the course where I would be, maybe 10 or 15 minutes or a half hour later.
Joseph Kariuki himself is kind of interesting because it turns out that 25K was his distance, and for a while he had the world record, and he just kept coming back and running this race and winning it, and it just seemed to be a distance that suited him, which happens to a lot of runners. One of the things I always remember about the race, the few times I've run it, is that you're getting to where you think you're pretty close to the end of the race, and you can see the downtown buildings, and then you see them, and you see them for some more and some more. It just seems like they're in your sight forever, and it's really kind of a long time before you actually get to cross the finish line.
And there's sort of a mirthful thing, too. The Boston Marathon is famous for the Sitco sign that you see when you know you're in the home stretch. There used to be a big boy statue at the Riverbank Run in front of one of the big boy restaurants, and that was sort of the icon for me. If I could get by the big boy, I almost had it made. In some of the races, at that point of the race, it seemed like the big boy statue was going faster than I was running.
The Fifth Third Riverbank Run is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year, and we want to say happy birthday, Riverbank Run.
Happy birthday. One of the great runs in my whole lifetime, and certainly in the state of Michigan.